November 13, 1942. Aero 148 hours. Bridge of the destroyer Amatsu Kaz, Iron Bottom Sound. Commander Tameichi Hara gripped the bridge railing as star shells burst overhead, illuminating his destroyer in harsh white light. For 20 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had perfected night combat into an art form. Now American shells were bracketing his ship before his lookouts could even spot the enemy muzzle flashes. Through the bridge windows, Hara witnessed something that shattered 2 decades of Japanese naval doctrine. American warships were firing with deadly accuracy at ranges beyond 10,000 yards, in absolute darkness. Their shells arrived with mechanical precision, unannounced by searchlights or star shells. The USS Helena's radar-directed guns had locked onto Amatsu Kaze, and when Hara left his own searchlights burning too long in a desperate attempt to locate his attackers, 6-inch shells tore into his ship, killing 43 of his crew. 3 kilometers away, the battleship Hiei shuddered under concentrated fire from ships her lookouts could not even see. The pride of the Imperial Fleet, veteran of Pearl Harbor, was being dismantled by an invisible enemy striking from beyond the horizon. What no Japanese officer yet understood was that they were witnessing the arrival of the SG, surface search radar, technology that would transform naval warfare and, within 18 months, erase Japan's most vital tactical advantage, the mastery of night combat. The mathematics of defeat were not being written in ships sunk or islands lost, but in the sudden obsolescence of 2 decades of doctrine, training, and national strategy built on one unshakable belief: that the Imperial Japanese Navy owned the night. That mastery had been cultivated since the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had annihilated the Russian fleet under cover of darkness. That victory became scripture, the foundation of a naval creed that held for nearly 40 years. That darkness was Japan's ally, the equalizer against any numerically superior foe. By 1942, this doctrine had evolved into the most refined night-fighting system on Earth. Japanese sailors drilled relentlessly in darkness. Lookouts were trained through specialized programs to sharpen their vision, spending hours in lightless rooms, maintaining strict diets to preserve night adaptation, and practicing distance estimation under starlight. The results were astonishing. A veteran Japanese lookout could detect a ship's silhouette at 7,000 meters on a moonless night, twice the distance of his American counterpart. To Tokyo's naval leadership, the advantage seemed decisive. Their optics were the finest in the world. Their men were the best trained. And across the Pacific, American ships still relied on crude, flickering radar sets that most captains distrusted. What none of them yet realized was that the age of human eyesight in naval warfare had ended. Their binoculars, crafted by Nippon Kogaku, the company that would later become Nikon, offered unmatched magnification and light-gathering power, turning darkness itself into an ally. Their Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, fueled by compressed oxygen, could strike targets at over 24,000 yards, distances far beyond the reach of American night detection. Early battles seemed to confirm everything the Imperial Navy believed. At Savo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers descended on an Allied task force under the cover of darkness and annihilated it in just 33 minutes. 4 heavy cruisers sunk without a single Japanese loss. Months later, at Tasafaronga on November 30th, a single Japanese destroyer squadron tore into a superior American cruiser group, crippling 4 ships in minutes. The night remained Japan's domain, lit by the orange flashes of their torpedoes. But even as these victories unfolded, a quiet revolution was taking shape in American shipyards and laboratories. Engineers at the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory had developed the SG, surface search radar, a technological leap so vast that it rendered the entire Japanese night-fighting doctrine obsolete before they even realized. It operating at a 10-centimeter wavelength with a power output of 50 kilowatts, the SG radar could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and track it with such precision that American gunners could fire accurately without ever seeing their target. In a war defined by vision, the side that could see first would win, and for the first time, that no longer meant the Japanese. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, founded in November 1940, became one of the greatest concentrations of scientific talent in history. By 1943, nearly 4,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians were working within its walls. At the heart of their research lay a single British invention, the cavity magnetron, brought to America in September 1940 by the Tizard mission. Historian James Finney Baxter III would later call it the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. This device transformed radar from an experimental tool into a weapon of precision. With it, American engineers created the SG Surface Search Radar, compact, reliable, and revolutionary. Over the course of the war, roughly 1,000 SG sets would be produced, each one capable of seeing farther and clearer than any optical instrument ever built. The first of the new Fletcher-class destroyers, USS Fletcher, DD 445, commissioned on June 30, 1942, carried this new radar as standard equipment, a quiet technological revolution installed atop her bridge. By November 1942, Fletcher was in the thick of combat in the Solomon Islands. There, at the naval battle of Guadalcanal, she stood as the lone Fletcher-class destroyer amid chaos, and the only ship on either side equipped with a true night-seeing device. Her SG radar's Plan Position Indicator, or PPI scope, gave operators what sailors would later describe as a God's-eye view of the battlefield. Every contact, friendly or hostile, appeared as a glowing trace on a circular screen that refreshed every 2 seconds. Trained operators could distinguish between ship types by their radar signature, track torpedo wakes cutting across the sea, and even detect submarines running at periscope depth. Unlike human eyes, the SG radar was indifferent to darkness, rain, smoke, or fog. It saw through the night with mathematical certainty, heralding a new kind of warfare where the first to detect was the first to kill. The SG radar was more than a set of eyes. It was a brain. Integrated with the Mark 37 gun director, it linked directly to an analog fire control computer capable of calculating firing solutions in seconds. The system automatically compensated for target speed, bearing, wind drift, and ship motion, feeding continuous corrections to the 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns. These weapons, standard on the new Fletcher-class destroyers, could deliver 15 to 20 rounds per minute per barrel, and with radar guidance, they could do so with unerring precision in total darkness. On the night of November 12th to 13th, 1942, this fusion of radar and fire, control would begin to dismantle, the very foundation of Japanese naval doctrine. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal opened when Rear Admiral Daniel, Callahan's task force, 2 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers, intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group en route to shell Henderson Field. Only USS Fletcher represented the new destroyer class. But several other American ships carried the revolutionary SG radar, including USS Helena, whose operators would be the first to glimpse the enemy. At Aero 124 hours, Helena's SG scope lit up with contacts, Japanese ships detected at 27,000 yards, more than 15 nautical miles away, far beyond any human's ability to see or hear. For the next 20 minutes, American radar operators calmly plotted the enemy's approach, bearing, range, and speed, while on the Japanese ships, lookouts strained hopelessly into the black Pacific night. The Imperial Navy, masters of nocturnal warfare for a generation, had entered a battle where darkness no longer offered protection. Her bridge was wrecked, her steering destroyed, her superstructure ablaze. By dawn, she would be scuttled, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. The disparity between Japanese and American night-fighting capability was now undeniable. Through late 1942 and early 1943, the Imperial Navy learned, often fatally, that radar had rewritten the rules of naval combat. The American SG radar operated at 3 gigahertz with 50 kilowatts of peak power, detecting destroyers at over 15 nautical miles with an accuracy of plus 40 yards in range and plus 0.5 degrees in bearing, weighing just 1,000 pounds and achieving 95%. Operational availability, it was light, rugged, and easily mass-produced, ideal for widespread deployment across the fleet. By contrast, Japan's Type 22 radar was already obsolete when it went to sea. Operating at 150 megahertz with only 2 kilowatts of peak power, it could detect destroyers at up to 10 nautical miles and only under perfect conditions. Its accuracy, plus 300 yards in range and plus 5 degrees in bearing, made it nearly useless for fire control. At 2,200 pounds, the set was heavy, temperamental, and plagued by reliability issues. Of the first 60 units produced, only 6 actually worked. Total Japanese radar production during the war reached barely 300 units, less than one-third of American SG production alone. This failure was not one of science, but of leadership. Japan had developed cavity magnetrons as early as 1937, and Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi, the inventor of the Yagi-Uda antenna in 1926, had pioneered directional transmission years before the war. Yet Japan's military establishment excluded Yagi from radar development, dismissing the field as unproven and strategically insignificant. The result was catastrophic. While Japan ignored its own pioneers, America industrialized their ideas. When Japanese forces captured British radar sets equipped with Yagi antennas, they failed to realize that the design bore the name of a Japanese inventor. The irony was profound. Japan's own technological legacy lay hidden within enemy equipment, unrecognized by those who could have exploited it. Deep-seated Army-Navy rivalry compounded the problem. Each service pursued radar development in isolation, producing incompatible systems, duplicating effort, and ensuring that Japan's limited scientific resources were squandered. By late 1943, the consequences of that fragmentation were playing out at sea. During the Battle of Vella, October 6–7, 1943, the destroyer USS Selfridge achieved what had once been impossible. She detected and tracked incoming long-lance torpedoes by radar, evading weapons that had been invariably lethal in earlier engagements. The Fletcher-class destroyer's SG radar provided far more than detection. It offered complete tactical dominance. What had begun as a sensor became a command instrument, allowing American ships to fight with machine-like coordination and precision in conditions once owned by Japan. The famed Tokyo Express, high-speed night destroyer runs, resupplying Guadalcanal, had depended entirely on Japan's mastery of darkness. These missions, executed by the Imperial Navy's finest captains, began to suffer mounting losses against radar-equipped American forces that no longer needed moonlight, flares, or searchlights to fight. Captain Raizo Tanaka, commander of the 2nd Destroyer Squadron and architect of many Tokyo Express operations, would later reflect in his 1956 U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings article, Japan's losing struggle for Guadalcanal on the growing American radar advantage. Though Tanaka's tactical brilliance had won him victories at Tassafaronga, he recognized that darkness no longer offered protection from American technology. By early 1943, U.S. destroyers were intercepting Tokyo Express convoys in complete darkness. Through rain squalls and heavy seas, guided not by vision or instinct, but by the invisible precision of radar, they fired first, fired accurately, and pursued the fleeing Japanese ships deep into the darkness. The night of November 25, 1943, off Cape St. George marked the final collapse of Japan's night-fighting supremacy. 5 U.S. destroyers under Captain Arley. Burke intercepted 5 Japanese destroyers attempting a transport run. In a running engagement fought entirely by radar, Burke's ships struck with devastating precision, sinking Onami, Makinami, and Ugiri, while suffering no serious damage themselves. The Japanese force never even achieved visual contact with their attackers. It was a battle waged by electrons rather than eyes, and it would stand as the last surface engagement in the Solomon Islands, closing the curtain on an era of traditional naval combat. By mid-1943, Japanese commanders were struggling to comprehend the new reality. The death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto that April deprived Japan of the one leader most likely to grasp the full implications of American technological ascendancy. Efforts to counter radar came too late and achieved little. Japanese technicians experimented with rudimentary radar countermeasures, strips of aluminum foil called gimanshi or deception paper. But these proved useless against the 10-centimeter microwave precision of the SG radar. Japan's radar development, crippled by inter-service rivalry and chronic resource shortages, lagged years behind American progress. The result was not simply a loss of tactical initiative. It was the extinction of an entire doctrine built on human skill and visual mastery of the night. Commander Tameichi Hara, the only destroyer captain to survive from Pearl Harbor to war's end, would later describe this realization in his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain. Though his recollections contained factual errors, his conclusion was undeniable. Our night-fighting expertise, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, had become meaningless. The Americans had made the darkness their ally. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, fought on November 2, 1943, offered the clearest proof that radar had transformed naval warfare. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39, equipped with several Fletcher-class destroyers carrying the latest SG radar upgrades, intercepted a superior Japanese force under Rear Admiral Sentaro Omori. At 0227 hours, radar contact was established at 35,900 yards, a distance that rendered Japanese optics useless. From that moment, the Americans possessed complete tactical control. For the next hour, their ships tracked every enemy maneuver with mathematical precision, closing to ideal firing positions while remaining invisible to Japanese lookouts. To Japanese observers, what followed seemed supernatural. American destroyers opened fire at ranges beyond 14,000 yards, in total darkness, and scored hits with their first salvos. They detected and dodged long-lance torpedoes by tracking their wakes on radar, then counterattacked. The launchers, without ever making visual contact. It was warfare, conducted entirely by instruments, machines, calculating, targeting, and striking faster than human senses could react. The outcome stunned the Imperial Navy. Despite numerical and firepower superiority, Omori's force was routed. The light cruiser Sendai and the destroyer Hatsukaze were sunk. Several other ships were damaged. American losses were minimal. Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison later wrote that this engagement ended forever Japan's advantage in night combat, yet the psychological shock ran deeper than tactical defeat. Officers and sailors who had spent years mastering night optics and torpedo tactics watched helplessly as those hard-earned skills became obsolete. Reports from Japanese operational headquarters recorded a marked decline in morale, a growing despair among crews who realized that no amount of training or courage could counter radar-directed fire. The night that had once been Japan's greatest ally had turned against her. Darkness no longer concealed. It revealed. From that point forward, the Pacific belonged to the electrons. The vaunted long-lance torpedoes, once the terror of the Pacific, increasingly struck only empty water. Japanese destroyer crews, elite sailors who had long considered themselves masters of night combat, found themselves helpless against an enemy they could not see, could not target, and could not understand. The Fletcher-class destroyer program embodied American industrial power at its zenith. Between 1942 and 1944, U.S. shipyards produced 175 Fletcher-class destroyers, more destroyers than Japan built of all types during the entire war. Each ship carried radar systems more advanced than anything afloat in the Imperial Navy. The SG radar, built by Western Electric, Westinghouse, and General Electric, was produced at a rate that defied Japanese comprehension. The heart of each unit lay the cavity magnetron, a device Japan's industry could not manufacture reliably, while Japanese scientists struggled to construct working prototypes. American factories mass-produced magnetrons by the tens of thousands. By the end of the war, the United States had built over 100,000 radar sets of every type, a scale of technological production that rendered comparison meaningless, and the quality advanced as rapidly as the quantity. The SG radar evolved through multiple versions, each iteration improving range, precision, and target discrimination. By 1944, American destroyers could detect a surfaced submarine at 18 miles and track a periscope at 3 miles in any weather, day or night. Meanwhile, Japanese radar research stagnated. The Naval Electrical Research Department employed barely 300 staff by August 1943, while the MIT Radiation Laboratory, the heart of America's radar revolution, employed nearly 4,000 scientists and engineers. The comparison was not merely quantitative, it was civilizational, where Japan's research remained fragmented, underfunded, and divided by inter-service rivalry. The United States had unified science, industry, and the military into a single technological machine. That integration, more than any single weapon, determined the outcome of the Pacific War. The SG radar could detect a surfaced Japanese submarine at ranges exceeding 15 miles, far beyond visual detection, even in daylight. For Japanese submarines, which relied on surface running to maintain speed and charge batteries, operational effectiveness was crippled. Transit speeds dropped from 15 knots surfaced to 3 knots submerged, and battery limitations reduced underwater endurance from days to mere hours. American destroyer escorts, equipped with radar-guided detection systems, hunted Japanese submarines with deadly efficiency. The USS England alone sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days during May 1944, each initially located by radar. By late 1944, Japanese submarine losses had reached catastrophic levels. Naval officers noted a striking parallel between their radar disadvantage and the B-29 bombing campaign. Just as American bombers struck from altitudes beyond the reach of Japanese interceptors, American destroyers struck from distances beyond visual range. Technology had created a sanctuary from which Americans could attack without exposure or risk. The psychological impact was profound. Japanese, sailors and pilots alike, experienced helplessness, fighter pilots watching B-29's crews overhead beyond their ceiling, and destroyer crews being shelled by invisible enemies. Both scenarios rendered training, courage, and traditional warrior skill irrelevant. In both cases, technological superiority had redefined the rules of engagement, making human skill subordinate to machines and sensors. The Battle of Vella Gulf in October 1944 provided the final, devastating confirmation of radar's transformation of naval warfare. The largest naval engagement in history became a stark technological mismatch, underscoring American superiority. During the Battle off Samar on October 25, 1944, the destroyer USS Johnston, under Commander Ernest Evans, engaged Japanese battleships using radar-directed fire in conditions of rain squalls and smoke. Despite being vastly outgunned, American destroyers and destroyer escorts coordinated attacks through smoke, screens that rendered Japanese, optical rangefinders ineffective. Japanese battleships relied on color-coded dyes in their shells to observe. Fall of shot, Yamato white. Nagato brilliant pink, Haruna greenish-yellow. Congo blood red, a method necessitated by the absence of fire control radar. This labor-intensive manual spotting contrasted sharply with the automatic radar-directed firing systems employed by the Americans. In the Surigao Strait, American destroyers executed coordinated torpedo attacks entirely guided by radar, striking from beyond visual range and neutralizing Japanese formations before they could bring their superior firepower to bear. The battle demonstrated that by 1944, radar had rendered traditional optical skills and human spotters largely obsolete, allowing smaller, outgunned American ships to prevail against numerically and physically superior forces. American losses in the engagement were 0 casualties, 0 damage. Captain Burke's after-action report was clinical. The entire engagement had been conducted by radar plot. Visual contact with the enemy was never achieved nor required. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable against radar-equipped American forces, marking the last surface engagement of the Solomon Islands campaign and effectively ending Japanese attempts to employ destroyers in night fighting. The industrial disparity made the technological gap clear. United States production, 1942-1944. Fletcher-class destroyers, approximately 1,000 SG radar sets over. 100,000 radar sets of all types, 250,000. Cavity magnetrons produced 2.5 million radio tubes monthly by 1944, 50,000. Trained radar technicians, 1.5 billion invested in radar development. 1940s dollars. Japanese production, 1942-1944. Destroyers of all types, approximately 300 radar sets, total 50,000. Radio tubes monthly at peak 500. Partially trained radar technicians, minimal. Investment in radar development, the disparity exceeded 50.1 in critical areas. America had more radar sets on destroyers alone than Japan produced for all purposes combined. Every Fletcher-class destroyer embodied industrial capacity Japan could not achieve for decades, and Japanese naval training programs never successfully adapted to the radar age. The premise that technology could replace warrior skill struck at the heart of Japanese military philosophy. Young Japanese officers, raised on tales of samurai valor and personal combat, struggled to comprehend a war in which the enemy was invisible and unreachable. The radar gap also challenged deeply ingrained racial theories that portrayed Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on technology because they supposedly lacked warrior courage. Japanese attempts to counter American radar revealed both ingenuity and futility. Window chaff proved ineffective against the sophisticated SG and associated radars. Electronic warfare efforts failed entirely, and Japan lacked the industrial base to produce jamming equipment in meaningful quantities. Tactical experiments, including the application of special paints to reduce radar reflection, were marginally effective at best. By mid-1944, the Naval Technical Department had essentially abandoned efforts to match American radar technology. The adoption of kamikaze tactics in October 1944 represented Japan's response to comprehensive defeat, not merely to radar disadvantage. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi organized the first official kamikaze unit on October 19, 1944, at Mabalacat Airfield. His stated rationale: with only 40 operational aircraft and poorly trained pilots, conventional attacks were futile. Analysis of the decision points to catastrophic pilot losses, training deficiencies, loss of air superiority, and resource shortages as the driving factors. Technology had rendered traditional skill irrelevant, and Japan's warriors were forced to innovate in desperation. The Type 22 radar used by the Japanese Navy operated at 150 MHz, 2 wavelength, with a power output of 2 kilobatters, providing a maximum range of approximately 10 nautical miles against destroyers under optimal conditions. Its range accuracy was plus 300 yards, and its bearing accuracy plus 5 degrees, with information displayed on a basic scope only. Production was extremely limited, totaling around 300 units. These specifications revealed a technological gap spanning generations. American radar operated at higher frequencies, providing far better resolution, used magnetron tubes that Japan could not manufacture reliably, and integrated seamlessly with automated fire control systems that Japan had not developed. Captured Japanese equipment and post-war interrogations underscored the depth of the disparity. Ironically, Japanese forces had encountered some of the underlying technologies early in the war. They captured British cavity magnetrons but were unable to reproduce them, and when they seized radar sets featuring Yagi antennas, they failed to realize the design was named after the Japanese inventor Hitsugu Yagi, whom their military had previously ignored. Post-war interviews conducted by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey revealed unanimous agreement among Japanese naval officers. Radar had transformed naval warfare beyond Japan's capacity to adapt. By 1943, officers were aware of the radar gap, but often suppressed this knowledge to preserve morale. even as the technological superiority of the United States increasingly dictated the outcomes of night engagements. The Battle of Cape St. George on November 25, 1943, marked the epitaph of Japanese night-fighting superiority. Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 achieved a perfect victory, sinking 3 Japanese destroyers without loss, entirely through radar-directed operations. This engagement convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable. Orders from the combined fleet effectively abandoned night destroyer actions. Acknowledging that the advantage in darkness now belonged entirely to the enemy. Central to this transformation was the MIT Radiation Laboratory, established in November 1940 under Dr. Lee Dubridge. By 1943, it had grown to nearly 4,000 employees, designing half of all radar systems deployed by U.S. forces. Its work extended far beyond the SG radar, developing over 100 different microwave systems with a total production value of $1.5 billion. The lab's foundation was the British cavity magnetron, delivered during the Tizard mission in September 1940, a device producing 1 kilohertz at 10 centimeters wavelength, 100 times more powerful than existing technology. The Americans not only harnessed this invention, but mass-produced it on a scale the Japanese could not replicate. 9 radiation laboratory staff members would later win Nobel Prizes, yet their wartime contribution, enabling the electronic revolution, transformed naval combat from visual engagements to radar-directed operations. The radar revolution forced fundamental changes in naval doctrine, many of which persist to this day, permanently reshaping the nature of naval warfare. Every modern navy recognizes that electronic detection has permanently supplanted visual observation as the foundation of naval warfare. A 1947 United States Naval War College study concluded that future naval combat would be determined by electronic capabilities rather than seamanship. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, established in the 1950s, built its doctrine around the hard lessons of the radar war, accepting that electronic warfare capability forms the true core of naval power, with all other considerations secondary to sensor superiority. During the war, Japanese technical officers who grasped radar's revolutionary implications were often ignored or marginalized by operational commanders still bound to outdated traditions of visual combat. The few officers trained in electronics became prophets without honor, warning of inevitable defeat even as leadership clung to the illusion of night-fighting supremacy. This disconnect between technical understanding and operational doctrine proved fatal. While American forces integrated radar into every dimension of naval operations, detection, gunnery, coordination, and command, Japanese commanders persisted in planning visual-range night attacks. Even as their ships were annihilated by enemies they could not see. The result was not merely tactical failure, but a systemic collapse of a martial philosophy built on skill, discipline, and courage, overwhelmed by the impersonal precision of electronic warfare. The final proof came in the statistical record of losses. The reversal was absolute. Radar transformed night combat from a sphere of Japanese mastery to American dominance. The very weapon Japan had perfected over decades was turned against them. Empowered by technology they failed to understand, could not reproduce, and ultimately could not survive. Every modern navy acknowledges that electronic detection has supplanted visual observation as the primary determinant of naval combat. A 1947 United States Naval War College study concluded that future naval engagements would be decided by electronic capabilities rather than seamanship. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, founded in the 1950s, built its doctrine around the hard lessons of the radar war. Electronic warfare capability is the foundation of naval power, with all other considerations secondary to sensor superiority. During World War II, Japanese technical officers who recognized radar's revolutionary implications were largely ignored by operational commanders wedded to traditional visual fighting doctrine. The few officers trained in electronics became prophets without honor, warning of inevitable defeat while leadership dismissed their insights to preserve morale. This disconnect between technical understanding and operational doctrine proved catastrophic. Meanwhile, American forces integrated radar across every facet of naval operations: detection, gunnery, coordination, and command, while Japanese commanders persisted with visual range night attacks, even as their ships were destroyed by enemies they could not see. The final proof lay in the loss statistics. The reversal was complete. Radar transformed night combat from a domain of Japanese mastery into American dominance. The very weapon Japan had perfected over decades was turned against them. Enabled by technology they could neither match nor counter. By the war's end, of the 70 modern destroyers Japan had possessed at Pearl Harbor, only about a dozen remained operational. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which had entered the conflict as masters of night combat, ended it unable to venture out after dark. Commander Tameichi Hara, the only Japanese destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive the entire war, published his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, in 1961. While the book contains some factual errors, his account remains the most comprehensive first-hand perspective on the radar war from the Japanese side. Hara participated in 16 major naval battles, witnessing the complete transformation of naval warfare. His ship, Amatsukaze, survived the November 13, 1942, engagement despite severe damage from USS Helena's radar-directed guns. He later commanded Yahagi and finally the destroyer Shigwa, surviving actions where most of his fellow captains perished. In his memoir, Hara criticized Japanese leadership for failing to grasp the speed with which the enemy could develop new weapons and for never understanding the full implications of technological change. He lived to see the Imperial Navy's vaunted night-fighting supremacy completely reversed by American radar, a skill and tradition rendered obsolete almost overnight by innovation. Admiral Riso Tanaka, who commanded the Tokyo Express runs, published his assessment in 1956 in the U.S. Naval Institute proceedings. He acknowledged that American radar had fundamentally transformed naval warfare, rendering traditional Japanese night-fighting tactics obsolete. The radar war forced a philosophical reckoning within Japanese military culture. The core premise of Bushido, that spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantage, was shattered by oscilloscopes and magnetrons. Post-war Japanese military thought had to reconcile centuries of warrior tradition with the realities of technological warfare. The lesson was absolute. In modern combat, technology is not supplementary but supreme. Those who see first win. Those who see farthest dominate. The final accounting of the radar war in the Pacific provides stark, quantifiable proof of a technological revolution, one that overturned decades of naval doctrine and human skill. Japanese destroyer losses in night surface combat tell a striking story. Poitu Navdek. 4 destroyers, 1943. 31 destroyers, 1944. 28 destroyers, 1945. To August 14. 4 destroyers. By contrast, American destroyer losses in the same engagements were minimal 1942, Navdek 3, destroyers 1943, 4 destroyers 1944, 1 destroyer 1945, 0 destroyers by 1944, and the technology gap was decisive. American destroyers with effective radar, 175 Japanese destroyers with effective radar, 0 American radar range advantage, 200 to 300%. Japanese night vision advantage, completely negated these. Numbers illustrate a revolution in naval warfare in less than 2 years. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which had spent decades perfecting night combat, was defeated by technology that did not exist when their training began. The Fletcher-class destroyers, equipped with SG radar, achieved something unprecedented: the complete negation of an enemy's primary tactical advantage through technological superiority. Japanese night-fighting expertise, cultivated since 1904, was rendered worthless by magnetrons and oscilloscopes mass-produced in American factories. Commander Tameichi Hara, who survived 16 major battles, offered a unique perspective on this transformation. From commanding Amatsukaze at Guadalcanal, where he first encountered American radar, To commanding Shigur, the sole survivor at Vella Gulf, he witnessed the complete reversal of naval warfare, from Japanese night dominance to American technological supremacy.